we live in an anti-scientific age.
Right.
Science is, as I've heard people say, science is just like a religion. And I go, no, it's not. It's the opposite of religion. It's
Yeah.
like you set up a hypothesis and then you prove it wrong, and it's true until it's proven wrong. That's why it reminds me of the quote from Clark Ashton Smith about, with all due certainty, I'm paraphrasing here, like the polarity of the insane will, outnumber those who are sane and will be incarcerated amongst them. Like, it feels like we're at a tipping point in regard to like the mass insanity is what uneducatedness. I don't know how to describe it, John, but like you look at the internet, and what internet has been this amazing, powerful thing, but it's a two-edged sword, right? We've isolated, we've become, and then COVID has not helped at all, of course, but we are going into these weird, diverse, conspiracy groups going off into the edges. It's like dark times. It's like this is like the dark ages, but I don't even know how to.
It's high-tech dark ages is what it is. And that Lovecraft mentions that, a new dark age.
Yeah.
That's like what we're in.
Yeah.
No, you're right. And in America, our country is so weird because on the one hand, the science we can do here is just fucking amazing. Just landing on the moon, what that took. But the vast majority of people, no, I shouldn't say that. Let's say 40%, which is significant in a country of 310 million or whatever. They are stupid. They're just dumb, man.
And it's really, and the problem is, instead of having things that help unite us as human beings, that we're all stuck on this rock together.
Yeah.
Quoting Lovecraft again, my favorite quote is, we're just a bunch of atoms, right?
Yeah.
Yet we can't, it's like we're trying to pull ourselves out of the primordial swamp, and we keep pulling ourselves back into the swamp. We can't succeed because we can't all get even closely on the same page. So the current of racism in the last 15, 20 years, with the advent of talk radio with like Rush Limbaugh and all that.
Limbaugh is the main guy.
Yeah, well, it is. It basically allowed an avenue to start expressing these things, and then in code. And now there's not even code anymore. It's just right out in the open. And if you think about like, and maybe you know about this, like in the 30s, 1930s in Florida, they had a public lynching of a black man that they posted in the newspaper, and like 2,000 people showed up, and with 2,000 people clapping and happy, and you know what, Hitler at the time said, we can learn from America and how to. So it's like,
listen, Hitler's hero was Henry Ford.
Yeah.
Henry Ford supported him 100%. And that's a piece of American history that people know about, but I think they should know. I mean, I just finished a play about Tesla and Edison called Power and Light. And originally I was trying to make it as a miniseries, but I couldn't get any interest. But I think we're going to produce that once the theaters come back in force. But one of the characters is Henry Ford.
Uh-huh.
And the amazing anti-Semitism of this man.
Yeah.
See, this is a point that I was thinking about when they had the Lovecraft it wasn't the Lovecraft Film Fest, but that Lovecraft birthday celebration.
Yeah, right.
And the disclaimer, we don't believe in his racist views and all that kind of stuff. And I got kind of a little bit hot, and it's all true. I mean, he did think that way, and it was vile and terrible. But it's almost like you would have to, if you really do that all the time, every time you enter a Ford car, you got to put like, and we do not believe that, Jewish people are subhuman like the founder of our company did. I mean, it's almost gets to be that ridiculous to me. I don't know.
Yeah. And that's the thing, Lovecraft for us, and I think, I can maybe speak for both of us. What's interesting isn't any of that kind of thought that he had, especially on the racial side of things. It was this idea of cosmic horror and our humanity's position in the universe, and as Fritz Lieber said, it was like the Copernicus, right? Like you mentioned before, John.
Yeah, he called him a literary Copernicus.
Right, exactly, because he changed the orientation of on horror. So
right.
So from that perspective, the art is interesting, and of course, I'm sure his philosophies influence things. But he was a complicated person,
Yes.
and it's not like this two-dimensional thing. Like, and I don't know where it was in the span of his thinking, but in S.T. Joshi's book, was it Decline of the West? He was talking about Lovecraft was very much will admit that other races had better qualities and worse qualities, and his own self, Nordic background.
Yeah.
But he was still a racist separatist. He wanted to keep things separate. He didn't want let your culture be your
Yeah,
culture.
he didn't believe in a melting pot, which we're all
Exactly right.
taught in school, which really never existed. But
Yeah. But you look at I'm of Italian descent, and you
no,
look at
really.
yeah.
I thought that was a wasp name.
Exactly. But you look at the Italians coming through Louisiana, San Francisco, and New York, and in Louisiana, a bunch of prominent Italians were hung just because they were different. And in New York, LaGuardia was able to get the Italians to integrate into society by stop staying isolated and only speaking Italian, and get and having joined the main culture. But then again, they've added a lot of stuff. So pizza, pasta, whatever you want.
Pizza, pasta.
I know
That sums it up.
Sorry for
well, I would like some pasta right now.
Yeah, but my point is like, so you have to have.
No, yeah, I know. And America was always, it was always the other. I mean, it was like. But everybody's an other. Everybody's an immigrant here.
But we were also founded by a bunch of loons.
Yes.
Or religious loons who Puritans and whatnot who
they
left.
Kicked the Puritans out of England.
Yeah, and England's going
after
great.
Cromwell.
And we get we were founded by a very set of very.
Well, that also kills me too. And one thing was, Lovecraft was anti-religion, and he would understand this, because when people say we're a Judeo-Christian nation, that is absolute bullshit. I mean, you look at our Constitution, and it's based on the Roman Republic, where they had a Senate, they had a kind of a president with two consuls, and it was a slave state.
Mm-hmm.
It was a slave republic that became a slave empire, and we're transitioning. It's very historical, man. I mean, I think we really are becoming this fucking empire now. Well, literally, where we're not going to have a president or anything, I mean.
You get this retreat into religion and superstition, when I think the outside factors are so overwhelming. Like, you look at our modern society, we don't have a simplistic world, right? Where it used to be you're a God-fearing person, you go to day to work, and everything's going to be okay, and everything is glorious. Instead, we have things like, well, climate can change, and COVID-19 and all these other things that I think overwhelm people. They just don't know what to do, and they retreat to the safety and ignorance of religion.
Well, that's what Lovecraft was reacting to in his time, and that was like the mass influx of immigrants,
right?
To this country. And it's like, the Italians, and I'm like Eastern European and all those, and he thought all that was absolute scum, the purity of the old English Nordic race and all that crap,
Well, but, and those things, punctuated by a certain.
And plus, they had a depression looming, and like we are right now.
Yeah, no one likes change. Most people don't like change. And, you look at Lovecraft and Providence, and you see how he wanted to be that 18th century powdered wig guy.
Yeah.
But you look at the city he loved, and it was built on Anglo-Saxon, thought and methodology, and it changing as Portuguese and Italians moved into Providence. The whole thing with Federal Hill became a very Italian centric area. Seeing those change and their festivals and other things, it's like diluting for him his love of what he liked about his culture.
There's a famous passage in Charles Dexter Ward where Ward goes on a trip for a couple of years to Europe, and then he comes home, and Lovecraft writes about Ward coming home and the feelings he felt, coming back to Providence. And it's one of the greatest passages he ever wrote. But in this book, which is a biography in letters, uh, it's almost the same passage, and he's writing it to Frank Belknap long after the 2 years in New York, which was just hideous for him. And he's talking about, like, on the train, he's going like New Haven, New London, and then quaint Mystic with its colonial hillside and landlocked cove. Then at last a still subtler magic filled the air, nobler roofs and steeples, with the train rushing airily above them on its lofty viaduct, westerly, in His Majesty's province of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. God save the king. That's him. He's still under King George.
Yeah, well, I think he definitely was, and the Great Depression, affected his thinking along those lines. But it's just interesting. Again, complex person. He did evolve. The long and short of it, he didn't evolve really very far in his racial thinking, even though he had friends talking to him about it. But
well, let me tell you one quick story that relates to Stewart, which I didn't get into when we did the tribute to him. But we were very close for a long time, and come over for dinner. And one day, Carolyn and Stewart was over at our house for dinner, and I don't know what we were talking about. Maybe it was like Stewart was talking about like how he was thinking about doing a play based on Lovecraft, and his wife, Sonia Green, was Jewish, and Stewart was very Jewish. I mean, he was a religious Jew, which kind of surprised me when I found that out, because you don't see that in his films, and he never really talked about it, much. But I gave him this book.
Yeah.
And I said, he was a big anti-Semite, Lovecraft. And Stewart's going, and this is after, you would think he's like one of the experts of Lovecraft, and my point is how hidden his racism is in a way. So Stewart's going, what do you mean? I know he married a Jewish woman, anti-Semite. So I give him the passage where he describes the Jews in New York, and Stewart reads it out loud. And when he's finished with it, he just throws it across the room. That was his first introduction to it. He didn't know anything about Lovecraft's racism.
Because in the past, unless you were a geek and got the collected volumes of letters from, Arkham House, what you were exposed to were only his short stories. And granted, a couple of the early short stories, like, what was it, the Arthur Jeremy one, I think, the White Ape, Yeah.
Well, it's about, and I guess you could say Lurking Fear too. I mean, where it's about.
But Lurking Fear, you can, abstractly just say it's just about decay and,
family genes going bad. Yeah.
And so that one, what happens is you have this one aspect of, all right, there's cosmic horror and other things, and just regular horror with weird tale aspects to it. And so you don't see that. And then if you find out about that, you might go back and read it and start interpreting it. And, it's funny is, of course, when I read, all his stories, I never got, but I wasn't using that filter, right? So I didn't get that's not what resonated for me. What resonated for me was that whole, the whole idea of our insignificance in the universe and the inevitability of some of this. Like we're in a calm, but you can't, it's inevitable what might happen in the future. Like, it's like color out of space, right? It's going to eventually take over the world. It just happens to be contained in that valley, right?
Well, who's the villain in Charles Dexter Ward? It's Joseph Curwen, the most Englishman you could think of, with the periwig and the whole thing. You would think he'd be Lovecraft's idol, and you should show the picture, but he's the most evil villain he's ever created. It's got nothing to do with racism or anything, and it's
right.
It's all about forbidden knowledge and
it's just hard, I think, especially now, is how much can you separate the man from the art, as they say,
Well, are you watching Lovecraft Country?
I am, yeah.
It's so creepy. You move your head in a certain way and his face appears and it's pointing. It's like,
pointing. Yeah, I know.
Where is that coming from?
I posted back then, so yeah. But I
have want you for Cthulhu.
and my opinion on it, John, is I love a fresh mashup and the take on it. I think it allows everyone here. So now you can see my poster.
Oh, okay. Oh, Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, Sherlock Holmes. This is a Subway
Oh,
poster.
that's a great poster. Yeah.
It is.
That was a great series.
Yeah, it was really fun. I really liked it when it came out.
Yeah.
Um, the thing about the Lovecraft country is that it's great. I mean, I really liked the aspect of it. It's the characters it's well acted. They're smart. It's degrading into a kind of X-Files format of it's the weird occult thing of the week.
Right. Well, it's like aping certain horror movies, like The Shining was one when they did a Jekyll and Hyde one, and they did a Japanese one. So I'm not getting a lot of Lovecraft out of it, really. But
no, and I think the Lovecraft stuff was kind of more in the beginning, but there is a lot of love in it. Like you can see a lot of the tributes.
Yeah.
You look in the art direction is very good in terms of like the costuming, the props, the books, everything.
And by the way, Andrew, can I make a point here, please?
You may make a point.
Remember we were talking about Lovecraft and setting it in this proper time period, right? And you were saying, well, I can see now that people would more relate to modern day audiences. Well, guess what? Lovecraft Country. It's set in 1950. It has to be set in 1950.
Well, it has to.
It doesn't, and it's a good idea because it's about the history of that time period too.
Yeah.
But my point is that if you set Lovecraft in 1927 for Charles Dexter Ward, you would get the same thing. You would get that feel. You could put that period in and the prejudice of that period. And plus, period movies look cool. I mean, they're just more expensive to do.
More expensive, absolutely. But I think you could put it in modern format. Modern day. Lovecraft was a pretty interesting philosophical character. I mean, evolving from Nietzsche and other philosophers, and and he was very much a materialist. But coming up with that.
Well, he called himself a mechanical materialist.
Yeah, what?
A mechanical materialist. That's what he called himself, whatever that means. But
yeah,
we're just automatons, or with a consciousness, I suppose, which is probably true.
But getting comfortable with the fact that he knows that we're going to have no real impact on the universe at large. It's funny. Some of the later stuff I read, it's almost Buddhist-esque. Like you come to this point of acceptance of being, an observer and not necessarily attached to all outcomes. Now, of course,
right. How ephemeral life is. That passage that I can't remember it, but it's that passage where we're just a bunch of atoms.
Yeah.
And once these atoms are gone, we're back into nothingness, and that's what we were before we were born. And that is a very kind of Zen.
Yeah, exactly.
Look at things. Yeah.
And so I feel like that's how he was evolving thought-wise. And so to me, I have a hard time. It's like, if you think that way, how could you feel that way about other races?
I know. That's a great point. That is a great point. Yeah.
And that's why I have this problem where I go, I just don't, because of his upbringing and not having, although his friends try to argue with him over time, I just think given time and the right influences, he would have come around, I think.
It is. It's sort of like he's saying, well, we're all meaningless in this universe, but don't fuck with English history and their their relevant their influence on America and our architecture and blah blah blah. And it is strange. I mean, he was like most people. He was a dichotomy and contradicted himself. Everybody does that.
Right. And so that the problem is you can't convey a complex individual or subject in a couple sound bites.
No, that's the problem. That's the problem we have right now. Yeah.
And
these are complicated issues.
Yeah, and we don't have conversations.